Hi everyone, I'm here to talk to y'all today about a subject that's very dear and special in my heart, and that's big books. I have very many big books nearby that we're going to talk about, and really not about the individual books, but about the joys of reading big books and the value. And today is March 31st, so it is the last day of March of the Mammoths, which is a booktube event that's created by Jason at Chapter and Verse. And I've seen some other booktubers do videos on it. And I've been kind of watching from afar and silently participating in my own way because I've been reading two mammoths for March of the Mammoths. And I completed one, and that's The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which will have its own video. This is a little customized cover. And then, of course, the other mammoth is, and I've been talking about it for a while, is The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikabue. And you can see how far I am there, like about 2/3. So it's a time to talk about big books, and I thought, well, shoot, it's the last day of March. I might as well get my foot in the door and talk to y'all about some really, really cool things. I have some notes that I've taken for this video, and I have 5 things that I'd like to chat about, and I'll just go through them one by one. First of all, I just want to give a shout out to Jason for starting March of the Mammoths. It's an awesome, great idea for a booktube event. And Jim at Jim's Books and Reading Stuff. Jim's Books, Reading and Stuff, I should say. He made a mammoth tag that's great, and I've seen some other people do that tag, so I'll link their channels down in the description. So the first thing I want to talk about big books is just my own experience with them and how I came to them and what I've read. Naturally, of all the books that I've read, I haven't read very many big books because that's just the nature of them. They're large and they take time, so they only count as one book. But the first one that I think I really ever read for myself was in my senior year of high school. And that was Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And this copy here, this edition, this is the Pavier Volokonsky translation, which is wonderful. I thought it was wonderful. I haven't read other translations, but I think this was really full of life. And I gave this copy also to Adam, and he read this, which is insane, that you recommend Anna Karenina to a person and then they read it. I mean, that's like every book person's dream. And this book really meant a lot to me in high school because I was going through actually a period of depression. It was a really, really tough period of my life, and this book kind of created a world for me to inhabit and occupy while I was going through that time, and was a form of, I think in this case, healthy escapism. I'm going to go back into that idea later on about what books can do for you, and that's, I think, point 4 or 5. But for now, I'll just say that this book really, really helped me when I was a young lad and in need of a voice like Tolstoy. So that's sort of the first book that I ever read that was maybe a mammoth. I'm not really sure what the definition of a mammoth is, but it was hefty and it was big, and it's amazing. And of course, if you haven't read Anna Karenina, I would highly recommend it. But then the other books that I have gathered here is that since then I've just read, I only have 5 more, is that I've read Lord of the Rings, or I should say I've listened to it. I've listened to it twice all the way through by J.R.R. Tolkien. And of course that's, it's one book and normally published in 3 volumes. And this is also, of course, a world. It is his secondary world, his legendarium, captured within this narrative. Of course, there's the external content like the Silmarillion, and then there's the prequel, The Hobbit. But I listened to the narrated Rob Inglis audiobooks of these pretty much all the time throughout the course of my life. If I ever am in a period of time where I have alone time, like a road trip, or am taking a walk and I want to listen to something, because normally I try to just not listen to anything, but if I do, this is what I go to. And then I finished them recently for the second time, like I mentioned, and the next time I go through them, I want to read them on the page, because I love Rob Inglis, and he's a perfect narrator, but of course it's an intermediary, and I want to experience it firsthand. So this is kind of the second mammoth of my life that has taken a pretty large role. And then basically after I graduated from college, I've read a couple of mammoths in succession, Moby Dick, of course, being the first thing. I then read Metamorphoses by Ovid, and this is actually not that long. It's a long poem, so of course this looks like a big edition, this penguin cloth-bound hardcover, but of course the text doesn't take up that much of the page. But this was an amazing experience. And of course The Brothers Karamazov, and then now The Tale of Genji. And so those are my qualifications for speaking about big books, which is not much. It's only like 6 books. I'm a new reader, so it's really pretty modest way to introduce myself. But I've had those experiences, and they've all meant something pretty large and significant to me. So I just want to talk about why big books are worth it. So that's the first thing, is just what I've had in my own life. And the second thing I want to say about big books is that you shouldn't be afraid of them or intimidated by them. Maybe afraid is too strong of a word, because it's not like you have a fear of big books, but maybe you do. And there's a couple of reasons I think why people are afraid of big books. But like any fear, I find it always really useful, healthy, rational thing to do is just follow the fear to its conclusion and see, okay, you have an impulse, you're intimidated by a big book, what's the worst case scenario? And after you kind of like say the worst case scenario out loud, it's like, oh, well, whatever. So what if that happens? So the way I think of it is if I was afraid of reading a big book, it would be, well, okay, I love reading. And I want. There's this big book that seems like you should read. First of all, that's not a reason to read a book, so you can dismiss any feelings of should, because you should only read if you want to read, not because of some external obligation. And let's say that you see this big book and you think, well, I'm afraid that I'm going to get bored by it. So that's fear number 1, maybe. Well, if you get bored by it, then you don't have to read it. It's okay. You can stop reading something. The reason you read, well, I guess there's a lot of reasons why you would read, but it's not just to be a better person or to be a better reader or to entertain yourself. It can be all of those things, or it can just be none of those things, and it can just be a pastime. But if you're afraid of getting bored by a big book, just know that a big book is just like any other book and can be super entertaining, just more super entertaining because there's more of it. The other thing is that if you're just really intimidated by not completing a book, knowing that it's okay not to finish every single thing that you start or begin, because no one is out here grading you. This isn't like school or anything. We're kind of taught that we need to finish our things, and if we don't, we've kind of failed. But that's not the case in our world where we have our own agency. So there's no reason to fear that. The other thing is that big books in general have a bad rep for being boring because bigness is conflated with being boring, which is so strange. And I think Moby Dick has gotten that, association when it's like the furthest from the truth. And one thing that I wrote down here was one of the funny things that I found is true in my own life is that if you kind of gently let go of fear, like excitement will fill the space that fear had. I know it sounds like maybe only kind of a pleasant thought instead of reality, but I think that actually is reality. Whenever I've kind of felt an energy and a nervousness or a fear, if I kind of change my way of thinking, that same energy which expresses itself from fear in one way can also express itself as joy in another way. And with big books, that is so the case, because if you just start a big book, open the first page, you will feel some sort of radiating pulse in it often. And I've found that for me, that often can get siphoned into excitement, but I can really understand why it might be a little bit scary at first. So anyways, I just want to remove some of the intimidation factor of big books, because you can always not finish it if you don't like it. And also, if it's large, it might have something to offer that smaller books can't offer. And that leads me to number 3, which is, what can big books do that small books can't do? And for me, there's one main thing that a really large book can do that is just impossible for a small book to do, and that is contain an entire world. This is probably not the kind of thing that has like a page number that says, okay, after 600 it can contain a world, but you'll know what I mean. Really large books, epic works, or maybe works written a long time ago that are very long, that just have their own setting in them. For instance, The Tale of Genji. It's almost like reading fantasy these days, even for a person from Japan, from modern Japan today, because Heian Japan is gone. And the world of Tale of Genji and the court life and the manners and the way of speaking and the poetic like tradition, all of that existed, it's not happening these days. And so in a way, it's it is an escape into a fantastical world of the past. And you can't get that feeling from the Diary of Lady Murasaki, which I'm also reading right now, because the Diary of Lady Murasaki is only 60 pages. But the Tale of Genji is a whole world. You can fall into it. It's not just a story. It's more than just a story, because it has to be longer than just a single story. It's a ton of stories in different generations. That feeling is really, really special and unique. And it takes a commitment to get into it, of course, because you have to read a lot, but it's worth it. The Lord of the Rings, of all the books that I have here, I have mentioned them to you before: Brothers Karamazov, Metamorphoses, Moby Dick, Anna Karenina, Tale of Genji. I would say Lord of the Rings and Tale of Genji are more worlds than the other. Anna Karenina, I don't know if I would even call that a world. That is more like a story, even though it's a large book. But these books, these are worlds. When you start a large book like that, you embark on a kind of journey into that world. You know, I wish I could say that reading The Hobbit or 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea does the same thing, because they're adventures, but it's not quite the same as embarking on the journey of a really large book, because that book is going to stay with you during the course of your life for a little while. Maybe it'll be a month, maybe it'll be less, maybe it'll be way more. Maybe you'll read a little bit of a book for a whole year, and for the rest of your life, that whole year will have some sort of, it'll be marked by that book. Maybe it'll be Don Quixote, and you'll think about the time that, you know, you took these trips and took it around, and that's just a very special thing that they can do. And the other thing that a world can do, and this leads to the fourth thing, is, and I want to be a little hesitant about what I say about the fourth thing, because it takes some qualifications. But large books can be good for you in a way that a small book can't. One thing that I wanted to mention with this is the relationship that these large books can have with grief. I'm a young person, so I haven't experienced too much grief in my life. Of course I have, because most people have. But of course, as you grow older, you experience more. And so the depth of my grief has not been great, and I've been really fortunate in that way. But from what I've already experienced in my life, and from what I know about seeing other people deal with grief, large books that contain worlds, I've seen people go to those when they're experiencing deep kinds of grief. I've seen in multiple separate instances, actually, The Lord of the Rings being a source of consolation for a lot of people who have lost loved ones. And it really makes total sense why. I don't think it's unhealthy. Of course, if you lose a loved one, you know, you don't want to give up this world, give up reality. But going into another world for a while, one that is lovingly crafted, one that is a masterpiece, one where the world makes sense, I think that can be invaluable, because you need a break sometimes from the grief that you're dealing with. And even if going into that world, of course, doesn't make you escape it totally, it's going to always be weighing on you. You can sort of be somewhere else in your mind, where, like I just said, where things kind of make sense, because when horrible things happen, the world stops making sense for a little while. It becomes kind of senseless if something terrible happens. But the Tale of Genji, it makes sense in that world, and so does The Lord of the Rings. And seeing that in the world has kind of made me think about going forward in my life, and inevitably, if I live, I'm going to experience grief. And knowing that, well, maybe there are a couple of books that I would go to that can help me along in those times. It's almost like having friends. Of course, friends, to be honest, of course, friends would be better for consolation than a book, but, you know, it's balance. It's those kinds of things. So there's a young person's opinion on that, on why Nemesis and large books can be really, really great. The other thing is that they can do is, in a way, and you don't want to go into reading a book for these reasons, but they can be good for you, that you can kind of learn things from them just by the act of reading them that you otherwise couldn't really get. For me, in my own case, I feel like reading large books helps me with self-control, giving myself a sense of commitment, a deep, lasting satisfaction, and even a kind of confidence. I know that sounds strange. It almost sounds like I'm being hyperbolic about these things, like reading Anna Karenina changed my life and now I'm a person who can get things done. That's not true. But I definitely felt after reading Anna Karenina that I had a greater sense of, well, in my own case, because I was going through a hard time at that point, I definitely did feel a greater sense of like myself and my identity coming from that book, just because it was such an anchor. But when you commit to reading one of these really long books and you stick with it all the way through, even if you're not enjoying it 100% of the time, you feel like I don't know, deeply satisfied in a way that's more and more difficult to come across these days because we're entertaining ourselves all the time with phones. I mean, it's the old crotchety argument, but it's completely true. If you have easy access to hyper intelligent AI that's going to entertain you every single second of every day around you, and you indulge that, then nothing will become deeply satisfying. Every single facet of your life will become more shallow, and it has become more shallow for most people living today. And it's, in my own opinion, this is my radical, it's the only thing maybe in the world right now that I kind of hate, is that people's lives are made shallow by kind of mean, cruel AIs that ruin their ability to give their attention to things. And reading suffers from that. The world of reading suffers. And of course, these large books can be an antidote to that. It's hard to get started with them, especially if you're like me and you have been addicted to those other worlds of AI and algorithms and recommendations. But if you've broken free of them, if you've deleted them and actually they've stayed deleted for a long period of time, and you go through a period of boredom and even micro-depression and come out the other end, you find that every single part of life is more interesting. It has a deeper, I mean, I would say for myself, my own belief system has a deeper spiritual quality. Maybe you kind of even open up some antenna to maybe the spiritual side of things. Or if you don't believe in the spirituality thing, maybe you just open up axons and neurons just to bird songs and things that are actually happening that are just physical that you weren't noticing before. In large books, I mean, like reading Tale of Genji, I was reading it today, and there are these passages, there's these sentences that I read that are small, and yet they just kind of shock me and astound me. And a sentence, just a written sentence, wouldn't have been able to do that to me in an era when, for instance, if I was 15 years old and addicted to like YouTube and watching YouTube videos all the day, that couldn't have done that to me. So large books, when you're in that world and you get these sentences. In the Tale of Genji, a person passed away like foam receding on the shore. They just kind of bubbled out. And it was such a sad, but for some reason, profound sentence that I just kind of sat there thinking about it for a long time. Maybe reading in general can do that, and not just big books, but big books are a grand test of that. So yeah, and the feeling of strengthening those kind of that acts of committing to something and going through with it. I really like that. I don't want to, again, I said that I wanted to qualify this fourth point because you don't want to be hard on yourself. If you start a big book and you're not liking it, don't torture yourself. You know, you want to love reading, and if you force yourself to read a 1,000-page book that you hate, then you're not going to be as excited about reading in general. It should definitely excite you, and maybe you can read big books while you read other smaller things. I'm doing that right now. Normally I don't read two things at once, but because Tale of Genji is so long, I've allowed myself to read other books at the same time. For instance, Brothers Karamazov and now 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And so I just think that's a great way to approach it, because then you can't feel like you're stopping your other reading just to read a big book that you know is going to be hard. Because if it's really large, chances are you might get a little bored of it and you kind of will desire something else. And I don't think it's overly indulgent to step aside for a little bit and come back. For me personally, when I do that, I try not to flip-flop in the same day. I try to go in chunks. You know, I'll read Tale of Genji for the next 2 weeks and then take a step back and read something else. And I find that really refreshing. If I were going in the same day reading two separate things, you can do that for sure, but I feel that my mind gets split a little bit, and I like the feeling of mentally, subconsciously kind of marinating in the world of the book when I'm away from it, and trying to go back and forth kind of disrupts that for me personally. The last thing, the fifth thing that I had is kind of, we're going to end on a little bit of a silly note. And that is that I wrote a very silly Dr. Seuss poem for an animated cartoon series that I'm working on just for fun as a side project. And basically, my two characters in this cartoon are the whole time are just kind of in the same room and talking with one another. And one of them is reading Moby Dick a lot of the time. And I have a small illustration of him there. There he is. I'm not much of an artist, obviously, but that's Jeremy, and he reads Moby Dick. And, he's in the background. A lot of these cartoons start with him just reading Moby Dick. And then, of course, his friend Boris walks in and he closes Moby Dick and he just chats with him. And then, of course, near the end of the series, he finishes it. And, he sets it down, kind of wipes a tear, and Boris says, "Oh, Jeremy, you finished your book." And Jeremy's, sad, and Boris says, "Well, I've written a poem for this occasion." So Boris writes a poem for Jeremy, and I'm going to animate it, and I thought I would read it to you on this occasion. I don't think it's not very profound. I don't know if it's bad, but anyways, it's a little poem, and I'll read it in Boris's silly voice so you can get a sense. But this is what he says. Betwixt the mist of whirling words, I lost myself in wondrous worlds. Wait, I think I messed that up. He says, betwixt the mist of whirling words, I lost myself in wondrous worlds. Little words, world play. But then upon the closing page, I found my heart was fit to break. And so I clambered across the lands, looking for a healing man, the shepherd with a question crook, the bookkeeper of Babanook. I found him in a carpet cave, smiling with his scrollful cape. He picked me up and spun me round, and took me deeply underground. And in his long library lair, he swirled his stories in the air. I've felt the worlds around me sing, I felt the joy of everything. He danced upon a floating poem, and plopped upon his bookish throne. He sang me then his secret tune, and held me as he told his truth. This world of books and world of stone, I'm never really all alone. You take one with you when you go, into the other to and fro. Art and life and laughs and tears, it's really all the same, my dear. It is the balance of this life, the delicate dance of dark and light. And yes, it's sad for every end, but do not think you've lost your friend. Though you must close the book, it's true, the book never closes you. A bit cheesy, a bit fun. That's called the Bookkeeper of Babanook. And, that last line, I'm sure that idea has been expressed before, more eloquently, but the idea that you close books, you finish them, but they don't really close you. I feel that's mostly true for these mammoths, for these large books. That's essentially all I really wanted to talk about today is the joys and the worth of reading these really big books, because they hold a really special place in my heart. It's different from other books. I think the main thing is that they contain those worlds. So just to recap from what I wrote down, the first thing that I wanted to talk about was just my own experience, Anna Karenina especially. Second is just don't be afraid of them, because there's nothing to be afraid of. We're reading and it's a good time. And the third one was what they can do, contain worlds. The fourth one is kind of how they can help you. Like I said, with grief, that's been one for me personally. And the last one is just reading the poem, The Bookkeeper of Babanook, just to express my joy and love for how big books never close their chapter on you. You do take them with you wherever you go. And especially for the period of time when they're with you. My spring semester of college, going into the summer, reading Moby Dick, looking back on that has the flavor of the sea, even if I wasn't necessarily by the sea, which is so cool. The human brain or whatever the spirit can kind of like hold that like it's water as you go. Through the world. So anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's a bit of a different tone. I'm a little bit more low energy today, and I think that's because I did like a bunch of Stairmaster. but yeah, Mammoths, March of the Mammoths is over, and I got my foot in the door right at the end. So I hope if you've participated that you've enjoyed reading large books. If you haven't want to start a large book, I don't really know what I would recommend. Anna Karenina was my first one, and one of the reasons why Anna Karenina was a good choice for me is that the chapters were very short. And having short chapters in large books is nice, because you feel that sense of accomplishment. I think one reason also people don't like to read large books in general is that you don't accomplish a lot by reading them, because you do all this work and then you've only read one book, because people are sort of productivity focused and they want their Goodreads to have lots of books, but a little bit of looking into that will show that that's not the reason you read books. Of course it's not. So these large books, they're worth your time. And if you embark on a journey, send me an email and text me or message me whatever your experience is, and if you're enjoying it or not, and I would be happy to respond. So thank you, BookTube, for watching this. Happy March, and I'll see you in April. Thank you.